Frank Del Rio, FDR we call him, CEO of Norwegian Cruise Lines. We're going to have a great conversation here about the possibility of doing cruising in Cuba. Good to have you here.
Great to be here.
You were born in Cuba, you're Cuban American, you're the CEO of a cruise ship company. Are you interested in investing in Cuba because you run a cruise company or because you are Cuban?
It's a double yes. There are other cruise lines not run by Cubans who are probably just as interested in going to Cuba as I am. But yeah, look, Cuba is a great opportunity. As we all know, that's why we're all here. But if there is one single type of business that can make an instant impact on Cuba, I think that the cruise industry has got to be at the top of that list. Primarily because we don't need much of their resources. You know, we talk about infrastructure. One of the wonderful things about the cruise business is we bring our infrastructure with us. And at the end of the day, we leave, and we don't have to use the scarce resources that are needed for the local populace. And we do that all around the world.
You don't need hotel rooms because everybody's on board. You know, I assume you need a good port?
We need water. Ports are nice, but they're not a necessary condition. I mean, we go to the wonderful places around the world that we all have heard of, places like Santorini and Mykonos in the Greek Isles. We go to Portofino in the Italian Riviera. We go to Sorrento, Amalfi, Cannes. None of those places have ports. You anchor and you tender folks in. But look, Cuba was handmade, if you will, for the cruise business. It's exactly where it needs to be from a time and distance perspective, because ships only can travel so fast. It's 220 miles from Miami. We bring everything we need, our food, our labor, our fuel, and then we leave. About the only thing in the short term that we need to have on the ground in Cuba would be buses, if you will, transportation, so that we can take our guests to all these wonderful places that Cuba has to offer. As you probably know, Cuba has 9 UNESCO World Heritage Sites.
What is the UNESCO World Heritage Site for the audience that doesn't know?
There are 1,007 sites around the world selected by this United Nations task force that identifies places that are unique in the world. Some are natural phenomena, some are historical sites that, in their opinion, should be preserved for future generations, something that ought to be taken care of. And so Cuba, for being a relatively small place, has 9 of these UNESCO World Heritage Sites.
How many does the U.S. have?
22.
So a small little island of 11 million people has 9, whereas the United States has 22. I mean, that's over-indexing by far, right?
Cuba's pretty good. Yeah.
So you need buses?
Need buses.
Guillermo here from Guillermo, you can get him some buses, right? The guy from the UN mission? No, teasing.
That won't be a difficult task to overcome. And then we will need local labor. We will need the bus drivers and the mechanics and tour guides who speak English, and I don't think that'll be an issue. So, look, the cruise industry today plies the 7 seas, goes all around the world, and yes, some places are very developed, like Miami is developed, and Istanbul is developed, and Barcelona is developed. But we also go to the Easter Islands, we go to Gambia, we go to Bora Bora, all the other places I mentioned. And so I think there's somewhat of a myth that Cuba isn't ready. It may not be ready to take on millions of land-based U.S. tourists, but today, 3 million non-American tourists visit Cuba every year, half of them from Canada. So their infrastructure may be, we may be underestimating what their capabilities are.
So travel restrictions when it comes to non-tourism travel have been eased dramatically. But is there anything that President Obama announced in December that allows you to do that?
It allows us to go to Cuba today? No. I think it gets us one step closer. It starts the conversation. It starts the wheels moving. But today, no cruise line that is American-based, certainly not a publicly traded company like Norwegian, can routinely go to Cuba with tourists. Tourism is still illegal under today's set of rules and policies and guidelines. And it would be difficult for us to have a ship with 4,000 tourist people, let's call them, show up in Havana and call that people-to-people travel. That would be a stretch of the rules.
Well, there's Paris Hilton and Naomi. I mean,
well, what about the other 3,998?
Right.
Yeah.
There are other companies doing cruises to Cuba. Do they have first mover advantage?
I don't think so. They're relatively small operators. 3 of the 4 are European-based, UK-based. One they charters a small, older ship. The cruise industry, as we know it, the major brands that the North Americans know, they're the ones who are going to make an impact, not these seasonal operators. They don't cruise to Cuba year-round. Many of them just visit one port in Cuba because they start in Jamaica. So no, I don't think anyone has first mover advantage yet.
You mentioned buses being one of the things that you need. Anything else in terms of the systemic infrastructure, in terms of their rules and things like that? Have you even explored that?
Yeah, well, in terms of infrastructure, we would prefer to have nice, modern ports and terminals and facilities. But like I said earlier, today we visit, my 3 brands visit over 400 ports worldwide.
Yeah.
And many of them are not as developed, not as advanced as what I think the Cuban ports are today. There will be some issues of size. So today, some of these gigantic vessels that carry upwards of 4,000 guests may not be able to enter down Havana Harbor by El Morro. They may have to go to Mariel, for example. I don't know yet the capacity of the port in Cienfuegos and Trinidad and Santiago, but I think that many ships in the North American brands, certainly in my brands, I have ships that range from 500 guests, 700 guests, 1,200 guests. No question they could enter even the tight straits of Havana Harbor. You get past 2,000, 4,000, but like I said earlier, you could always tender, you could always anchor.
Yep.
So
in the green room, you were showing me a possible itinerary. Were you just scratching that out today? Have you had that, in the drawer for, 10 years? Or as, December 17th, you said, oh, let me start doing this?
No, I've had it before December 17th.
Yeah.
I knew December 17th would come sooner or later. But I happen to do all the itineraries for all my ships anyway, so it's something that I do.
Doing the crossword puzzle? You just
I scribble places, and you saw them for yourself. We're not going to share them with the group today because there are others amongst us that must not know this. Or
competitors?
Competitors, one at least, a good friend. But I'm sure they have similar itineraries. There's nothing unique about what I know that others don't know. But you saw it. It's a very interesting itinerary. On a 12-day period, you get to visit 3 other countries besides Cuba, yet you still visit 5 Cuban ports, all the major ones. Doing so, you get to visit, I think I told you, 8 of the 9 UNESCO World Heritage ports. So it's a heck of an itinerary. I do that one in a heartbeat.
How interested is the cruising public in Cuba?
I think there's great pent-up demand. Anytime any kind of focus group has ever been asked, what is your number one determinant of what cruise you're going to take, or if you're going to take a cruise, it's where am I going? Cruising is still a destination-oriented place. And as I said earlier, if Cuba was 90 miles off the coast of Boston, it may not be that interesting for cruising, or 90 miles off the coast of Seattle, but it's 90 miles off the coast of Florida, the cruise capital of the world. Not just Port Miami, but Port Everglades, Port Canaveral, Tampa, Palm Beach. Everybody, and by the way, the Caribbean is the world's #1 cruise destination. More than a third of all passengers go to the Caribbean. Cuba is the largest Caribbean island, the one closest to the U.S., the one that has the most to offer. I mean, Cuba has 3 major mountain ranges, 200 rivers, lakes, rainforests, valleys, the history of Cuba, the Baroque, neoclassical, Art Deco architecture of Havana. And then it's been off limits for 50 years. Just a pent-up demand of some forbidden fruit, so to speak. There's great demand. There was a poll recently where the American Society of Travel Agents were asked if Cuba were to open up, what would happen? And they believe that within 2 years, 2 million Americans would go to Cuba. By the way, in 2014, even with all the restrictions, 125,000 Americans went to Cuba. They weren't tourists, because that would be illegal, but 125,000 people went to Cuba. And so if that many went, with all the hurdles they had to jump, imagine how many would go if they were able to.
It would probably be much cheaper too, right? Because those people-to-people licenses, when I look at those trips, they're all incredibly expensive for the duration of time that you're there because of all the middlemen that are taking a chunk of getting the paperwork done for you. I mean,
Yeah.
the changes in the travel restrictions have definitely brought those costs down, and then add cruising to it, and it becomes even much more affordable, right?
Well, you know, one of the reasons why the cruise industry has grown as much as they have, as quickly as they have, is the tremendous value that there is in cruising. For one price, you receive your transportation, hotels, food, entertainment, and the value proposition of cruising in general is tremendous. And when you combine that with all the other expenses you would normally have to incur in traveling to Cuba in today's environment, then yeah, it's an incredible savings and a better product because it's a modern ship, the food they're familiar with, and they get to travel all around Cuba, in the evening after they've been on port all day. Cuba was, again, I can't emphasize it enough, not just the geography of Cuba, so close to the U.S., but the way the island has all these wonderful places to visit scattered, that is, allows you to go from port to port, but the distances aren't so far as to make it inconvenient. It's just about perfect.
If you could start suddenly doing cruises to Cuba, what would that do to what are going to be their competitors of other Caribbean islands? I'm assuming they're going to suffer. Is that a good assumption?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the itinerary that I read to you included 3 other foreign countries, right? It included Mexico, it included Grand Cayman, it included Jamaica. So I think those surrounding islands could benefit from when Cuba opens up to general tourism. Competition is good. It's what our free market system is based on, and so I think that Cuba will become a better destination because they'll have competition, and the other places will rise to the challenge as well. But at least in the short term, there may be a temporary shift of the demand away from the traditional Caribbean islands that people visit today to Cuba, partly because of that pent-up demand, that forbidden fruit type of situation that people will want to see.
How long does that last, forbidden fruit? I mean, once people go back, is that's a 3-year jump in revenue? That's a 5-year jump in revenue? Does it just grow the market?
You know, it's hard to say. If all obstacles were eliminated, if today Cuba attracts 3 million visitors, over time, in 5 years from now, could it absorb 6 million visitors? The other 3 coming from the U.S.? Very possible. I think in relatively short order, or Havana can become one of the top 10 port destinations in the world for the cruise industry.
What are the top ones right now?
It's Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Port Canaveral, Barcelona, Civitavecchia for Rome, Nassau, Cozumel, Venice, Southampton, Galveston. Galveston is number 10. So yeah, I think Havana can fit nicely.
Top 5?
Could be. Yeah. Certainly top 10 within 5 years. Could be top 5 shortly thereafter.
Wow. Have you been back?
No.
Have you sent anybody to do any business intel or anything like that? No?
No, I think there's enough public available intelligence that for the time being, given what our limitations are, I don't physically need to go. If the embargo was lifted tomorrow, I'd be there in the afternoon, and we'd then start to work.
And what would be the first thing you do?
Visit the home I lived in. And then I would talk to the business leaders, the government officials who, like we would in any other country that we visit, the port officials to make arrangements for our ships to come in, and what are the facilities like, and what's the transportation situation, what are they going to charge me to pull up my ship there? That's important. And it's not that hard.
Talking to the officials there, that brings up an interesting point, because so much we're talking amongst ourselves here, right? And we don't know quite what they're willing to do or what they want. I mean, Castro didn't want tourism, right? He allowed it in begrudgingly during the last crisis. So you don't know that even if the embargo went away, is it going to be easy? Or have you thought about how you frame it to them to allow passenger ships to travel there?
Well, those conversations will have to take place. Like you said, we're having a one-way conversation.
Right.
The indications are that the Cuban government, as they reconsider the way they're going to run their economies, that they will welcome cruise ships.
I mean, they're there now.
They welcome cruise ships now.
Right.
Yeah. They have built at least 5 important berthing facilities since 1995 that are significantly underutilized. So all indications point that if the embargo were to be lifted, which is a necessary step to do anything else, that business could be transacted.
Do you think the embargo should be lifted?
Yes.
Why?
I don't know what good it's doing today. Cuba does business with just about every other country in the world. So if we're trying to snuff them out, unless you prevent all the other countries in the world from doing business with Cuba, the intended consequence isn't happening. It's been 50 years, 50 plus years. Got to try something new, just have to. I left when I was 7 years old. I haven't been back since. My wife is also Cuban-born. We have 2 children. They've never been to Cuba. We now have 4 grandchildren. They'd like to, I want them to see Cuba. It's just time. Some things in life, you just know when it's the right time. And it seems to me that it hasn't been this ripe for it to be the right time ever. Still a lot of work to be done, I'm told. I hear what you've heard this morning from those in Washington, and I just hope to keep trying and keep working. There's lots of important negotiations going on in the world, right? Yesterday was a deadline in some place called Iran. Not sure what happened there. I've been flying.
Nothing worth mentioning yet.
Okay. Look, in the tourism business, we need places to visit. And we had a very positive turnaround a few years ago in Burma, Myanmar. And now we can get to go to Myanmar and Rangoon and all those wonderful places. But there's other places besides Cuba that we in the travel industry, in the cruise industry specifically, would love to be able to go to that we can't for political reasons, geopolitical reasons. And so that would be a wonderful thing if we can just all get along and we can visit these wonderful places that people want to see.
We have a few minutes for questions from the audience, so get ready and hand out a mic, and I'll ask what is my favorite question that I always ask, which is, what should I have asked you, or did you expect me to ask you?
No, I think you covered all the bases. If I was giving a presentation as opposed to answering questions, I think I would have presented what Cuba has a lot to offer. I'd be hard pressed to think of a destination worldwide that has a diversity of natural resources, beauty, history, things that are of interest to primarily the American customer, the mystique, the exoticness, the music, the art,
the weather,
food,
the proximity,
the weather, the food that Cuba offers. And when you layer that on top of the fact that you haven't been able to enjoy any of this for over 50 years, I'd like to sell that product.
Ralph Patino, this is a perfect segue. How active is the cruise industry in general in their lobbying efforts of Congress and Senate to lift the embargo?
I don't know if there's any formal and active initiative underway to lobby Congress. The cruise industry, we rally around CLIA, our industry association. But even then, I'm not aware of any active lobbying to lift the embargo per se.
Do you think there should be some lobbying on the part of the cruise industry?
I think Congress, government in general, know that business in general favors the lifting of the embargo, and the cruise industry is no different. So I don't think that we necessarily have to take a leading role there.
I see somebody very eager back there, and he's got a mic. Is it on?
Hello.
There it
Hello.
is. Good.
Hi there. My name is Michael Eisenberg. I'm president of Educational Travel Alliance. Every year we arrange people-to-people programs in Cuba for several thousand people from the U.S. We're licensed by the U.S. government to do that. Included in our clients are 50 passengers per week that arrive on a cruise ship that's operated by a Canadian company. Previously, the restrictions were that you had to fly in and out of Cuba, so they would board in Cienfuegos and get off in Santiago. That restriction has now been lifted, and the U.S. government permits the passengers to board in Jamaica, go around the island, and return to Jamaica. My perception is that there is an openness now to have more ships come in, and that OFAC is at least worth approaching about giving a specific license to a cruise company that wants to go to Cuba. And I just want to know if Mr. Del Rio believes that it might be worth just approaching OFAC about a specific license at this time.
Until my perspective is, and for my three brands, until Congress officially repeals Helms-Burton, even if OFAC were to, even if you can go backdoor through OFAC, it wouldn't be the proper thing to do. And I don't think you can do it on a sustained basis. Maybe you can do 50 folks at a time, but to run a business You have to bring thousands of people at a time on an ongoing basis. I don't think that back door or that loophole, if you will, would work on a sustained basis.
Thank you.
Where else? Right here in front.
Thank you. As a public listed company with plenty of trained talent, when you partner with a new destination, how do you assist not only on the infrastructure, but offering quality entertainment activities so the passenger, the tourists come back, and how do you assist the destination to attain this, if at all?
You're saying how do you assist in terms of having entertainment
Yes,
in Cuba when people arrive?
Especially with a new destination that not necessarily is prepared to receive large tourism. They need assistance not only on the infrastructure, but as well on how do you present all these beauties that Cuba has and in the proper way. So how do you advise on how to prepare the whole experience as a destination?
How do I advise the destination?
The company, yes. Do you assist the destination in working to offer to best showcasing the destination and having it ready for this?
Well, sure. We work with the different tourism boards of the different destinations we go to try to explain to them what our customers are looking for. So there's some basics. They want to make sure that it's clean and safe, that the guest feels safe, that there are things for them to do. Depends on the season that we go. You don't want to go to a beach destination in the winter, for example. In certain situations, we will invest in port development. In certain situations, we actually buy private islands and we revitalize them, develop them so that our ships can pull up to those places. We've done that in Belize. We've done that in the Bahamas. In places where there is port congestion, oftentimes there is quasi-private and government investment to develop the piers, if you will. But we don't tell those destinations what they ought to showcase. Those destinations have what they have. And if it's good enough for us to go, then we go. There are many places who lobby us all the time, bring your ships here, but for whatever reason, either they're the wrong distance or wrong place, we don't think that it's commercially viable. At the end of the day, we're running a business, and if we bring you to places that you don't want to go to, we're not going to be able to sell those cruises. I can look you in the eye and tell you that I think that the American public, even our Western European guests who we know already go to Cuba, want to go to Cuba on a cruise.
Last question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think they want to go to Cuba, period. And at least early on, the best and easiest way to experience all of Cuba is on a cruise ship. Yep. Every day we go to a different port. We'll start in Havana, and I'm almost tempted to tell them where we're going, but no, I'm not going to do it. So.
Should have taken a picture of it. Okay, last question. Sorry. Last.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, everybody's always afraid of competition, but we all know that competition makes everyone better. And so, as I mentioned earlier, if Cuba opens up, there's going to be more focus, more marketing, more attention on the Caribbean at large. People will want to come to the Caribbean, not just to visit Cuba, but to visit other places. Just like oftentimes, being on a cruise is the way to get folks to come back and spend longer time in that destination. So you go to Santorini and you like it. You say, geez, someday I want to come back and spend a few days here or a week in the Greek islands. And so the cruise industry is a great way to introduce customers to that destination. And so, yes, I agree that over the long term, I think the entire Caribbean basin will benefit from a free Cuba to travel to Cuba freely. In the short term, there may be some demand shifts from one location to the other. But I think at the end of the day, it's good for everyone.
Thank you so much for doing this. Really appreciate it.